Every night I cook dinner for 2 people, and every night I eat alone. The plate across from me is always clean by the time I stand up from the table. I've never once seen a hand reach for the fork, never heard chewing or the clink of a glass being lifted. But the food is gone, the water is gone, and the chair pushed back from the table by an inch or two, the way a person shifts when they're finished and satisfied. I could start this story from a dozen different places, but the truest place is my mother's kitchen. Not because that's where it began. It began long before her, long before me, but because that kitchen is where I first understood that a life can be shaped around a secret, the way a tree grows around a wire fence. Eventually, you can't separate the two. The wire is part of the wood. We lived outside Harlan, Kentucky, in a white clapboard house at the end of a gravel drive that turned to mud every March. My father died when I was 4. Black ice on Route 421. I don't remember the funeral. I remember his boots stayed by the kitchen door for almost a year afterward, and then one day they were gone, and I didn't ask where. After that, it was my mother, my brother Eli, and me, and whoever sat in the 4th chair. My mother set that plate every evening without variation. White ceramic with a thin blue rim, part of a set she'd inherited from her mother, my grandmother Ruth. She placed it at the chair between her own seat and the kitchen window, laid out a fork and knife and folded napkin, and served food onto it the same way she served ours. Chicken, meatloaf, pork chops, whatever we were eating. Mashed potatoes, a vegetable. A glass of water filled 3/4, same height as everyone else's. When I was 5 or 6, I asked who the plate was for. She didn't hesitate, didn't glance at the chair. "It's for who it's for," she said, and handed me the biscuits. That answer should have been maddening. Instead, it was so calm, so complete in its own certainty, that it closed the door on the question entirely. She said it the way she'd say we eat dinner at 6 or brush your teeth before bed. A fact of the household, nothing to examine. Eli, 5 years older and built for avoidance even as a kid, never brought it up at all. He ate fast, kept his eyes on his own plate, and disappeared after dinner the way boys in Harlan did into the tree line, down the creek, over to a friend's trailer. If the 4th plate bothered him, he'd packed that feeling away somewhere I couldn't reach. So it was me and my mother, most evenings, and the plate. And what the plate did. I don't remember the first time I noticed, which might be the most disturbing part. It didn't arrive as a single observation. It accumulated, slowly over months, maybe years, the way you realize a crack in the ceiling has gotten longer. By the time I was 7 or 8, I really knew, not just suspected, that the food on the 4th plate changed during dinner. Not dramatically, not the way it would if someone sat down and ate a full meal, but a bite would be missing from the chicken. The mashed potatoes would have a small depression, the kind left by a spoon or a thumb. Green beans shifted to one side of the plate, and the water level in the glass would be lower. Not much, half an inch, maybe an inch, but lower. I decided my mother must be doing it, picking at the food while she cleared dishes, pouring out some water when my back was turned. That explanation held for a while, the way a sandcastle holds against a rising tide, intact but fragile, dependent on your willingness not to look too closely. I looked too closely. I watched her every night, the way children learn to watch the adults they depend on. She didn't touch the 4th plate during the meal. She didn't touch it while clearing. She'd carry her dish to the sink, then mine, then Eli's if he'd been home. Then she'd come back for the 4th plate and stand over it for a beat. Just one beat, like a measure of music. She'd look down at what remained, and something in her face would settle, not relief and not worry. More like a person checking a gauge, confirming a number is in the right range. Then she'd scrape the leftovers into the trash and wash the plate with the rest. That pause. I've thought about it 1,000 times. It was the only part of the ritual where my mother seemed present to what she was doing, where the routine cracked open for a second and I could see something underneath. She was reading the plate. She was measuring how much had been eaten, and her reaction depended on what she found. When I was 9, a nothing evening, midweek, probably a Tuesday from the leftover casserole, I moved the fork on the 4th plate. My mother was at the stove, her back turned. I reached across and slid the fork 2 inches to the left. It was an impulse, barely even a decision. I just wanted to see what happened. My mother sat down. Her eyes went to the plate immediately, not to the food, but to the fork. She picked it up, placed it back exactly where it had been. handle aligned to the napkin edge, tines at a specific angle. She didn't look at me. She didn't say anything. She passed the casserole dish and asked if I'd finished my spelling homework. But her hand when she moved that fork. I still think about her hand. The fingers were careful the way you'd be careful returning something to someone fussy. Someone who had a way they liked things. Someone who would notice if you were even a little bit wrong. I waited 3 years before I tried again. I was 12, and I was angrier about not understanding than I was scared of what I might find. So one night, while my mother carried the bread basket to the table, I pressed a small X into the top of the mashed potatoes on the 4th plate using the back of my spoon. Quick and quiet. The X was about the size of a nickel, clean and centered. We ate. I watched the plate. The X was there when we started. It was there when I reached for the salt. It was there when my mother asked me whether I'd return a library book that was overdue. I looked down to cut my chicken. Looked back. The X was gone. The surface of the potatoes was smooth, not just unmarked, but deliberately smoothed, like a palm had pressed across them. And in the center, where the X had been, there was a shallow, round impression. Not a spoon mark, rounder than that. Deeper at the edges, like a thumb pressed slowly and firmly into something soft. My mouth went dry. The plate was 3 feet from me. I'd been watching it for most of the meal. Whatever did that had done it in the seconds I'd looked away, and the gap between one glance and the next, between the end of one blink and the start of another. I told my mother my stomach hurt. She felt my forehead, said I was warm, sent me to bed. I lay in the dark for 2 hours with my fists against my ribs, listening to the house cool and tick around me, thinking about that thumbprint. Not the strangeness of it, the intimacy of it. Something had pressed its thumb into my mother's mashed potatoes and smoothed away the mark I'd left, and it had done it gently, patiently, the way you'd correct a child who'd drawn on a wall. That same fall, I cornered Eli on the back steps. The air smelled like goldenrod and coming frost, and the crickets were so loud you had to raise your voice slightly. "The extra plate," I said. "Nah." He was breaking a stick into small pieces, tossing them into the dark one by one. "I'm serious." "I know you are. That's why I said nah." He threw a piece of stick harder than the others. "Don't make trouble over something that isn't trouble." "The food moves, Eli, during dinner, while we're sitting right there." He stopped breaking the stick. His hands went still in his lap, and he stared out at the yard. In the quiet between crickets, I heard him swallow. "I know it does," he said, flat, like admitting something to a cop. "I've known since I was 8, and I decided a long time ago that knowing was as far as I was willing to go. That doesn't bother you. Everything about this house bothers me. That's why I'm leaving the second I turn 18. He picked up a new stick and snapped it in half. "Mom's got it handled. She's been handling it since before I was born. If it was dangerous, we'd be dead already. We're not dead, so I leave it alone." "But who's eating the—" "I don't know. I don't want to know." He stood up and brushed off his jeans. "And if you're smart, you'll stop wanting to know too." He went inside. The screen door slapped shut behind him. That was the most he ever said about the plate, and it was the last time I tried to talk to him about it for years. Eli left at 18 just like he said he would. Got a job at a distribution warehouse in Lexington. Didn't come back for Thanksgiving that first year or the year after. He wasn't estranged exactly, he just kept the house at arm's length. The way you might avoid a dentist you know you need to see. Deliberate, sustained, quiet avoidance dressed up as just being busy. After he left, it was me and my mother, 2 people eating at a table set for 3. The winter I was 14, I came downstairs at 2 in the morning. Thirsty, nothing more. I didn't hit the light switch. The moon through the kitchen window was bright enough to see by, and I didn't want to wake my mother, whose bedroom was just off the hall. I filled a glass at the tap and turned around. The 4th chair was pushed in. I want you to understand what that means, because the detail only matters if you know the pattern. My mother left the 4th chair pulled out, always, every day, angled slightly away from the table and turned just so, the way you'd position a seat for someone about to arrive. The linoleum under the legs was worn into faint grooves from years of the chair sitting in exactly that spot. She pulled it out in the morning and it stayed out through breakfast and lunch and dinner and the evening and the night. But at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in January, the chair was pushed flush against the table, neatly, deliberately, The way you'd tuck in your chair after standing up from a finished meal. The kitchen was cold. Not winter cold, not drafty house cold. A specific, local cold. It felt like standing next to an open freezer, and the center of it was the table, the chair, the empty place. And there was a smell, faint enough that I almost dismissed it. Dried apple peel, wood ash. And underneath those, something earthy, a root cellar, damp stone, soil that hasn't seen sunlight in a long time. Old, that's the best word. The smell was old. I set my glass on the counter and I stood there, barefoot on the cold linoleum, staring at that chair. 30 seconds, a minute. Nothing happened. No sound, no movement, no apparition. Just a pushed-in chair and a cold room and a smell I couldn't explain. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep. In the morning, the chair was pulled out again. Same angle, same grooves. After that night, I began to notice things I'd been living alongside without registering. The way my mother paused every afternoon outside the spare room, my father's old office, which she'd never cleared out or repurposed. She'd stop at the doorframe with her hand almost touching the wood, and her head tilted slightly, the way you tilt your head when you're listening for a car in the distance. 2 seconds, 3. Then she'd move on. She did this every single day. The temperature in the kitchen, which dropped about an hour before dinner and didn't warm up until the dishes were done. I'd assumed it was the window. I checked the window sealed tight, no draft. The cold was internal. It gathered near the fourth chair and spread outward from there, like the chair was the drain and the warmth was the water. And the smell, dried apples, always. It arrived around 5 o'clock each evening, the way a neighbor might walk through the door. It thickened during dinner and faded after. No sauce I could find, no fruit in the house, no candle, nothing baking, just that smell filling the kitchen, then leaving. When I was 15, during a hard week in February when the pipes had frozen and my mother was tired and short-tempered from hauling water from the neighbor's well, I did something I shouldn't have done. I didn't set the fourth plate. My mother was in the bathroom running a space heater near the pipes under the sink, trying to thaw them. She'd told me to start setting the table. I set 3 places, mine, hers, and Eli's, even though Eli hadn't lived at home in 2 years. Force of habit. I didn't set the fourth plate. I didn't make a conscious decision not to, or maybe I did, buried somewhere under frustration with the cold and the broken pipes and the daily strangeness of our life. I just didn't do it. My mother came into the kitchen, saw the table, and went white. I don't mean pale. I mean the blood left her face so fast I thought she was going to pass out. She gripped the edge of the counter and stared at the table, and for 3 or 4 seconds she didn't breathe. Then she moved. She got the plate, the blue-rimmed plate from the cabinet, and set it in its place with hands that were trembling finely, like a wire under tension. Fork, knife, napkin. She served the food. She filled the glass. She pulled the chair out, checked the angle, adjusted it a 1/4 inch. Then she turned to me. "Don't you ever do that again." Her voice was low, controlled. But behind the control was something I'd never heard from my mother. Not anger, not panic. Urgency. The kind of urgency a person has when they're standing on a road and they see headlights coming and they know exactly how many seconds they have to move. "Mom, I just forgot." "You didn't forget. There's no forgetting in this house." She held my gaze. "That plate gets set every night. Every single night. Even if I'm sick, even if you're sick, even if this house is falling down around us, that plate gets set." I'd never seen her like that. In 16 years of watching my mother carry this ritual with steady hands and a neutral face, I had never once seen it crack open and show me what was underneath. And what was underneath was fear. Real, sustained, load-bearing fear. The kind of fear you can live inside for decades if you manage it carefully enough. But it was there. It had always been there. That night, the kitchen was the coldest it had ever been. I could see my breath at the table. The dried apple smell was so strong it was almost sour, like fruit gone just past ripe. My mother served the fourth plate in silence, heaped full, water to the very brim. She ate without looking up. I ate without tasting anything. The plate came back clean. She washed it slowly. She stood at the sink for a long time afterward, both hands flat on the counter, her head bowed. She looked like someone who'd just barely caught a vase falling off a shelf. "Don't test it," she said without turning around. It's not the kind of thing you test. The following November, when I was 16, the pattern changed on its own. It was a Thursday. Pork chops. Low amber light through the window. My mother set the table, and when she got to the fourth plate, she paused with the serving spoon held over it and looked at the chair. Not a glance, a long, careful look, like checking the expression on someone's face before delivering bad news. She served double. 2 pork chops, a mound of rice, and a full dish of applesauce instead of the usual tablespoon. Water to the brim, the surface trembling with how full it was. She sat down and barely spoke through the meal. I asked about the Dyers, whose house she'd cleaned that morning. 1-word answers. She was listening to something I couldn't hear. When I cleared the table, the fourth plate was empty. Not disturbed, not sampled. Empty. Scraped clean, like it had been licked. The glass held nothing but a single drop rolling down the inside. My mother held the plate in both hands. Her shoulders dropped. Not relief. Resignation. Something she'd been bracing for had arrived, and the only thing left was to keep going. From that night on, every plate came back clean. She cooked more from then on. Better food. More of it. Pot roast. Fried chicken that took an hour. Cornbread from scratch. She served the fourth plate first, before ours, arranging the food with the anxious precision of someone trying to please a guest they couldn't afford to disappoint. The smell in the kitchen went from faint to constant. The cold spread from the corner to the whole room. By December, I was wearing a flannel shirt to dinner and still feeling a chill that had no direction, no source, no explanation. I set up my phone to record the table one night, propped against the sugar bowl, lens aimed at the fourth plate. When I reviewed the footage in my room, there was a gap. 4 minutes of grey static, the audio replaced by a low electrical hum. When the image came back, the plate was clean. I tried it twice more. Same result both times. The gap moved different spot in the meal each time. Whatever it was, it knew the camera was there. I called Eli, told him the plates were coming back clean now, that Mom was cooking double portions, that the cold in the kitchen was getting worse. He was quiet for so long I checked my phone screen to make sure the call was still connected. When I was 10, he said finally, and his voice had dropped into a register I barely recognized. I got up to use the bathroom and the kitchen light was on. Mum was sitting in her chair at the table. The fourth chair was pulled out. Nobody was in it, but she was talking, quietly, nodding, waiting, the way you talk to someone sitting across from you. I watched for a minute and went back to bed. I never said a word about it, and neither did she. Who was she talking to? I think you already know. He cleared his throat. Listen, Mom's carried this thing her whole life without it breaking her. If something's changed, she'll handle it. She always handles it. She looks tired, Eli. She looks old. That landed. I heard him breathe through his nose. Then be good to her, he said. Make her life easier. Don't make it harder by pulling at threads she spent 30 years keeping tied. He hung up. That was the last time we talked about the plate until years later. A week after that call, I went into the spare room. The closet wasn't locked. On the top shelf, behind a folded quilt, there was a wooden box about a foot long. Unfinished pine, no latch. Inside, a stack of letters tied with kitchen twine, a small ceramic saucer blue rim, same pattern as the dinner plates with a dark ring of burned residue in its center, and a photograph. The photograph was black and white, creased from being folded and carried. A woman on a porch, maybe ours, decades earlier, the railing intact, the clapboard white and straight. She was thin, dark hair pulled tight. Not old, not young, not any particular age at all. She was looking into the camera with an expression I've never found the right word for. Patient isn't enough. It was the face of someone who had been waiting for a very long time and could wait much longer and didn't consider the waiting a hardship, just a fact. On the back, in small, angular handwriting, she keeps her word, you keep yours. The letters were addressed to my grandmother Ruth, 9 of them. I sat on the closet floor and read them all with the quilt pulled across my lap like a child hiding. They were written in that same angular hand, formal, careful, the kind of language a person uses when they want to be understood exactly with no room for reinterpretation. They described an arrangement, not all of it, The letters assumed Ruth already knew the details and only needed reminding, but I gathered the shape of it. My grandmother had come to this house young, alone, pregnant with my mother, running from something. The letters called it the difficulty and your trouble that winter. One used a phrase I keep coming back to, the thing that followed you out of Letcher County. Whatever it was bad enough that my grandmother needed help she couldn't get from any normal source. A woman named Irene provided that help. The letters didn't say what Irene did. They said she settled the matter and removed what was pursuing you. In exchange, Ruth agreed to one condition: a plate of food set at the table every evening, served as if Irene were family, for as long as anyone lived in the house. Most of the letters were brief, reminders, gentle ones mostly, with an undercurrent of precision that felt more like a contract than a conversation. I trust the arrangement continues. I trust you remain well. But one, written in a slightly different ink and a slightly looser hand, was almost warm. I know this is not easy, Ruth, but I am not unkind. I eat what I'm given because it is owed, but also because it means I am remembered. There are worse hungers than mine. The final letter was different from all the others, shorter, the handwriting tight. Ruth, you're getting older and I understand that. But the arrangement doesn't end with you. It ends with the house. Whoever sits at that table next will need to understand. I have been patient. I have been fair. I expect that to continue. Then, after a gap, in even smaller letters, you have seen what I do when I am not fed. I retied the letters. I put them back. I replaced the quilt and closed the closet and stood in the spare room and breathed. That night I sat through dinner and watched my mother set the fourth plate with the kind of mechanical grace a person develops after decades of repetition. I knew what was under the calm now. I could see it, the effort it took to make something impossible look ordinary. The weight of doing it night after night for a whole lifetime because your mother did it and her situation made it necessary. And now the necessity had become yours. Halfway through dinner, I told her I'd been in the spare room. Her fork stopped. She set it down on her plate, folded her hands, and looked at me. The expression on her face wasn't shock. It was the particular exhaustion of a person who'd been waiting for a conversation they'd hoped would never come. "Then you know," she said. "Some of it. That's all anyone knows." She picked up her water glass and held it without drinking. "My mother knew some. I know some. Irene knows all of it, and she doesn't explain herself. Who is she? She's Irene. She's been Irene longer than any living person can account for. She looked the same in that photograph as she did when she came to this house and sat in that chair and talked to my mother when I was 15 years old. She came here, physically, walked up the porch steps, knocked on the door, sat in that chair, ate a meal, talked to my mother for an hour while I sat in the living room listening to voices I couldn't quite make out through the wall. She set the glass down. When she left, my mother was shaking, not from fear, from proximity. You know how your ears ring after a loud noise? It was like that. Being near Irene for too long does something to you, fills you up with something that takes a while to drain. You said she's been here twice. My mother nodded slowly. The second time was a few months after your father died. I was sitting at this table at 3 a.m, trying to figure out how to keep 2 boys alive on a house cleaner's pay, and I felt the chair move. She looked at the 4th chair. I didn't see anything. But the chair shifted under someone's weight and the smell came, you know the smell, and a voice said, very close, very quiet. I have kept worse things from this house than grief, child. Set the plate and I will keep you safe. Her eyes were bright. She didn't blink. That was the most comfort I got after your father died. Not the pastor, not the church women bringing casseroles. A voice in an empty chair that told me to keep doing what I was already doing and everything would be all right. She exhaled through her nose. And it has been 20 years. Whatever Irene is, she keeps her word. I looked at the plate across from me, clean, glass empty. When you leave this house, I said, when you stop living here, what happens? Somebody else has to set the plate. She said it the way you'd explain gravity. I left for college 2 years later, Northern Kentucky University, far enough to build a life, close enough to visit. I came home for holidays. The table was always set for 4, the plate always clean by the end, the chair always at the right angle. My mother and I didn't discuss it. It sat between us the way a scar sits on skin, visible, permanent, long past hurting. After graduation, I moved to Cincinnati, got an apartment, got a job, Got a routine that had nothing to do with blue-rimmed plates or empty chairs or the smell of dried apples. I told myself I was free of it. The house was my mother's burden, inherited from her mother, and it would stop with her. I owed nothing to a bargain struck before I was born. I hadn't agreed to anything. I was clean. 3 years into my Cincinnati life, my mother called on a Tuesday. I'm selling the house, moving to Lexington to be near Eli. Something lurched in my chest, but I said, good, that's good, Mom. I need to talk to Irene first. I need to sit at that table and explain that I'm leaving and the arrangement is changing. What's it changing to? Long pause. The refrigerator hummed. The radio played something I couldn't identify. I don't know, she said. And that's what scares me. The letters say the deal lasts as long as someone's in the house. They don't say what happens when the house goes empty. I don't know if Irene waits. I don't know if she wanders. I don't know what hunger does to something that old. She sold the house to a young couple from Virginia. She left instructions for them, a letter in the kitchen drawer, the wooden box on the table, which plate, where the chair goes. She told me she'd written it all plainly, as simply as she could, the way her mother had explained it to her. Do you think they'll do it? I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. We both knew. For 6 months after she moved, my mother sounded lighter on the phone. She went for walks. She joined a quilting circle at her church. She laughed more. She sounded like a woman who'd set down something enormously heavy and was rediscovering what her body felt like without it. Then the couple called the real estate agent. They'd found the letter and the box. They were furious. They thought it was some backwoods hazing ritual, a local prank to spook outsiders. They'd thrown the box in the trash, the letters, the photograph, the saucer, all of it. My mother called me that night. She wasn't panicked. She was still, the way the air goes still before a bad storm, when even the birds stop. They need to set the plate or they need to leave, she said. There's no middle ground. I told her to let it go. I told her it was someone else's problem now. I told her everything people say when they want to believe the normal world still applies. Their well went dry 4 weeks later. The county couldn't explain it. 2 months after that, the couple's dog ran off and came back 3 days later and would not go inside the house. Sat on the porch staring at the front door with its ears flattened and its lips pulled back, not growling, just frozen, like something on the other side of that door had looked at it and the dog had understood what it was seeing. They fed it on the porch for 2 weeks before they gave up and moved out. After they left, the house sat empty. Through winter, through spring, nobody bought it. My mother's friend Darlene drove past it that summer and said the sweet gum trees had pushed up against the windows like they were trying to get in. The porch had buckled on both sides. The clapboard was going grey. She said it looked like the house was folding in on itself, losing its shape, the way a person's face loses its shape after months of not sleeping. She said the word hungry and then laughed, nervous, and changed the subject. 13 months after the couple left, on a Saturday in October, I drove to Harlan. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell Eli. I barely told myself. I woke up in my Cincinnati apartment and got in the car and drove 3 hours south into the mountains without making a conscious decision. My body just went, as if it already knew something my mind was still arguing with. The house looked like it had been holding its breath, smaller than I remembered, grey where it used to be white. The porch sagged toward the center, the boards dark with moisture that didn't seem to come from rain. The sweet gum trees had crowded the kitchen window so tightly their branches pressed flat against the glass, and in the wind they moved with a slow, dragging patience that didn't look like trees in the wind. It looked like fingers. But the house was standing. The bones were sound. Whatever was eating it slowly. I used the key my mother had given me years ago and never asked for back. The lock was stiff, but it turned. Inside, the smell hit me before anything else. Dried apples, wood ash, turned earth, so thick it was almost a taste. A year of it concentrated in the sealed air of an empty house, soaked into the walls and the floor and the fabric of the curtains my mother had left behind. Not rotten, not unpleasant, just dense with presence. Like stepping into a room someone had only just left. The table was there, the 4 chairs. The 4th was pushed in tight. Finished, done. I stood in the kitchen and listened. The silence was specific. Not the dead silence of an abandoned house, more like the held silence of a room where someone is waiting for you to speak first. The drawer still had my mother's letter. The couple hadn't taken it. The cabinet still held 2 of the blue-rimmed plates, pushed behind some mugs. My mother had left them on purpose. She'd known someone would come back. Maybe she'd known it would be me. I washed one of the plates, dried it on my shirt, set it at the 4th place fork on the left, knife on the right, paper towel folded where the cloth napkin should go. I pulled the chair out and adjusted the angle until it matched the grooves in the linoleum, and something in my chest shifted, and I stood there with my hands on the back of the chair and breathed. I drove into town, bought a rotisserie chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, a bottle of water, drove back, heated everything on the stove, which still worked, as though it had been waiting to be used, served the plate, a full plate, the way my mother had done it at the end, generous, heaped, water to the brim. I made my own plate. I sat in my mother's chair. I ate slowly in that cold kitchen with the last October light dying in the window glass. I didn't look at the 4th plate. I kept my eyes on my own food, and I chewed and I swallowed, and I thought about my mother in this same seat for 20 years. What that costs. Not money, not time, but something harder to name. The piece of yourself that has to stay open to something impossible, that has to hold the door ajar every single night and never flinch at what might be standing on the other side. When I finished, I looked. The plate was clean. The glass was empty. The chair was pushed in 1.5 inches, the small exact distance of someone sliding back from a table after a meal. I sat in the darkening kitchen and stared at the clean plate and the pushed-in chair, and what I felt was not fear. It was a settling, like a key sliding into a lock you didn't know you were carrying, like arriving at a place you'd been driving toward your whole life without ever having seen it on a map. I washed the dishes, dried them, put them away, stood at the sink in the near dark with my hands flat on the counter. Then I drove to the hardware store and bought cleaning supplies and light bulbs and a new doormat. From the motel parking lot, I called my mother. She picked up before the 2nd ring. "I'm at the house," I said. "I set the plate." She breathed in, held it, let it go. When she spoke, her voice had a crack in it that I'd never heard before, not from grief, but from something being released. "I know, baby. I know you did." "How?" "Because about an hour ago my phone rang. I picked up. No voice, just quiet, and then the sound of a chair being pulled out." She paused. "And then the line went dead. I moved in the following week. Fixed the porch first. Cut back the sweet gum trees so the windows could see daylight again. Painted the clapboard. The well came back the morning after that first plate just started running, clear and cold, as if a hand had reached deep into the ground and opened a valve. That was 5 years ago. I live here now. I'll live here until I don't, and then someone else will need to understand. Every evening I set 2 plates, mine and the one with the thin blue rim. I serve the food. I fill the glass. I pull the chair out. I eat my dinner. The plate is clean when I finish. I've never seen anyone in the chair. No shape, no shadow, no figure in the corner of my eye. The house doesn't feel haunted. It feels kept. The way a garden feels kept when someone tends it alive and orderly and humming with a kind of quiet intention. But the signs are there if you pay attention. The dried apple smell arrives every evening at 5, as reliable as a clock. Some mornings there are impressions in the table near the 4th plate, faint ovals in the wood grain, like someone rested their hands in the same spot for a very long time. And at night, after the dishes are done and the lights are off, and I'm lying in bed listening to the house tick and settle, I hear the chair, the low scrape of wood on linoleum, someone pushing back from the table. A pause. Then, minutes later, the sound of it being pulled out again. Set. Ready. My mother visits every few months. She eats with me. She looks at the 4th plate but doesn't comment on it. When she leaves, she always stops at the 4th chair and rests her palm on its back for a moment. Lightly, briefly, the way you might touch a person's arm as you pass them. Last spring, while cleaning the spare room closet for the 10th time, I pulled up the old shelf liner on the top shelf, yellowed adhesive paper curling at the corners. Underneath, pressed flat to the wood as if it had been placed there with great care, was one more letter. Same handwriting, smaller. I was not always what I am. I was a woman once, a long time ago, in a place that is no longer a place. I was hungry, though not for food. I was hungry to be known, to be accounted for, to have a seat at someone's table. Your grandmother was the first person in a very long time who set a place for me and did not flinch. I have not forgotten that, and I never will. Feed me, and I will stand between this house and every dark thing that knows where you sleep. This is not a haunting, this is a promise, the oldest kind. I put the letter back, smoothed the liner down, closed the closet. That night I cooked a proper meal. Fried chicken, potatoes, green beans with butter. I set the plate, filled the glass, pulled the chair out, and while I ate, I talked quietly, the way my mother talked to that chair on those late nights when she thought nobody was listening. I told Irene about the gutter that needed fixing, and the bird building a nest under the eave, and the weather that was supposed to come in from the west. Ordinary things. The kind of things you tell someone who sits across from you every night. The kitchen was cold the way it always is in the evenings now. The sweet smell of dried apples, the branches tapping the window in a rhythm that might have been wind and might not. When I finished, the plate was clean. I washed the dishes, dried them, put them away. I left the chair pulled out. I'll be in this house until I'm done, and then it will be someone else's kitchen, and someone else's hands washing the blue-rimmed plate, and someone else listening to the scrape of a chair in the dark. The debt is mine now, by blood and by choice and by the fact that I sat down at this table, and someone I've never seen accepted what I offered. I don't know what Irene is. I don't need to know. I know she's old. I know she's hungry. I know she keeps her word. And I know that every night, after I turn off the kitchen light and walk down the hall to bed, I hear her. The chair sliding back. The stillness of someone standing up from a table. The quiet, unhurried sound of a guest who is finished and satisfied and who will return tomorrow because she has been promised a place. I sleep well in this house, better than anywhere I've ever been. It's almost 5. I should start cooking.